In the swirling vortex of international trade negotiations, where economic policies collide with political theater, the US-Canada relationship finds itself in a peculiar limbo, a holding pattern that's as tense as it is revealing. As President Donald Trump once again wields tariffs like a blunt instrument aiming to reshape global commerce in America's image, our northern neighbor has opted for a response that's anything but reactionary. Instead of mirroring the bombast that has come to define Trump's approach, Canada is charting a course of quiet defiance, one that underscores a profound shift in how allies navigate power imbalances in today's geopolitical landscape. This isn't just a story of tariffs and trade deals, it's a narrative about resilience, strategy, and the long-term consequences of short-sighted aggression. As someone who's spent 2 decades dissecting the intricacies of American politics, from the Oval Office machinations to the ripple effects on Main Street, I can tell you that what we're witnessing here is more than a bilateral spat. It's a microcosm of how Trump's America First doctrine is reshaping alliances, often to the detriment of the very interests it purports to protect. Let's rewind to the stroke of midnight on August 1, 2025, when the latest chapter in this saga unfolded. President Trump, true to his playbook, escalated tariffs on Canadian goods not shielded by the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, from 25% to a stinging 35%. This wasn't a sweeping overhaul affecting every corner of the border trade. It targeted a relatively small slice of exports, but the symbolism was unmistakable. It was a punitive strike, designed to coerce Canada into signing a hastily assembled trade deal on Trump's terms, much like the 11th-hour agreements he extracted from South Korea and the European Union. Yet Canada didn't budge. Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, a figure whose background in global finance lends him an air of calculated precision, Ottawa held firm, insisting on terms that genuinely served Canadian interests, rather than succumbing to pressure tactics. This move marked a stark departure from the cooperative spirit that has long defined US-Canada relations. For generations, this partnership has been the envy of the world. A seamless blend of economic interdependence, shared defense commitments through NORAD, intelligence sharing via the Five Eyes Alliance, and cultural ties that blur the lines between our two nations. Think of the countless families with roots on both sides of the border, the hockey rivalries that unite more than divide, or the energy pipelines that keep American homes lit and factories humming. But Trump's tariff hike signaled a pivot toward confrontation, treating even the closest ally as a potential adversary. It's a reminder that in the Trump era, no relationship is sacrosanct if it doesn't align with the immediate optics of strength and victory. What struck me most, as I pored over the reactions from Ottawa and provincial capitals, was the absence of hysteria. There were no fiery press conferences, no knee-jerk retaliatory measures that could escalate into a full-blown trade war. Instead, Canada's response was measured, almost stoic. Ordinary Canadians, from the bustling streets of Toronto to the rugged coasts of British Columbia, expressed frustration but not outright fear. They've been through this rodeo before. Recall the first Trump administration when retaliatory bans on U.S. products like whiskey sent shockwaves through American distilleries and prompted political backlash in key states. That history lingers, informing a collective wisdom that tit-for-tat escalations often hurt everyone involved. Today, many Canadians advocate for building long-term resilience, diversifying supply chains, investing in domestic innovation, and fostering partnerships that aren't solely dependent on Washington's whims. Prime Minister Carney captured this sentiment eloquently in his public remarks, emphasizing Canada's inherent strength. "Canada is strong," he declared. "We can give ourselves far more than anyone can take away, building sustainably, building together, building positively, and that's what we're going to do. And yes, we will come to something with the Americans." It's a message of self-confidence, devoid of bluster, that resonates in a country weary of the unpredictability that has characterized U.S. trade policy under Trump. The public mood has evolved. There's an exhaustion with the cycles of power plays and theatrical diplomacy. Trump's style, grand announcements, looming threats, and demands for submission, is increasingly viewed not as shrewd negotiation, but as performative spectacle. And this time, Canada is opting out of the show, refusing to play the role of the beleaguered understudy. Behind this calm facade, however, strategic wheels are turning. Reports emerged just days after the tariff hike that Canada and Mexico are collaborating on a Northern Corridor agreement, an ambitious initiative to streamline trade between the two nations, effectively bypassing the United States where possible. This isn't mere posturing, it's a pragmatic hedge against American unreliability. Economists have pointed out that while the vast majority, about 95%, of Canada's exports to the U.S. remain protected under the USMCA, the affected sectors carry outsized political and symbolic weight. Provinces like Ontario, home to steel mills and automotive giants, feel the pinch acutely. These industries aren't just economic engines, they're woven into the fabric of communities, supporting jobs, families, and local economies that could sway elections on both sides of the border. Former U.S. Ambassador to Canada David Cohen, a voice of reason in these turbulent times, issued a stark warning about the erosion of trust. For decades, the U.S.-Canada bond has been a model of stability, rebuilt meticulously during the Biden years after the strains of Trump's first term. But each new tariff chips away at that foundation. When you blow up a relationship as important as the U.S.-Canada relationship, there are consequences, Cohen noted, and those consequences are manifesting in tangible ways. The proposed $120 billion Northern Corridor trade route isn't just infrastructure, it's a quiet declaration of independence, a signal that allies are preparing for a world where American leadership is less dependable. In accelerating these plans, Canada and Mexico are acknowledging a harsh reality. The U.S., under Trump, risks isolating itself from the very partners it needs for economic vitality and strategic depth. Trump's administration, ever eager to tout victories, pointed to a 3% GDP surge in the second quarter of 2025 as evidence of their policy's success. But dig a little deeper, as any seasoned political observer would, and the picture blurs. Economists, including those referenced in Commerce Department briefings, attribute the bump largely to a technical rebound. Businesses stockpiled imports in anticipation of tariff deadlines, leading to a temporary drop in imports that inflated growth figures. It's not sustainable prosperity, it's a mirage born of uncertainty. Trump boasted of securing 200 trade deals by August 1st, but the reality is far more modest, closer to 8 with Canada conspicuously absent. This discrepancy highlights a core flaw in the strategy, prioritizing appearances over substance, alienating key partners in the process. Contrast this with the deal Trump inked with the European Union just yesterday, a flashy affair that underscores the selective nature of his trade priorities. The agreement imposes a 15% tariff on most goods, mandates hundreds of billions in energy purchases and investments into the U.S. economy, and culminated in a high-profile handshake in Scotland. French President Emmanuel Macron didn't mince words, calling it a dark day for Europe, lamenting a pact that prioritizes American gains at the expense of European sovereignty. For Trump, this was a coup. Global headlines, immediate economic commitments, and a narrative of triumph. But notice the omission. Canada wasn't even mentioned. As the U.S. quote, S largest trading partner by volume, this sidelining isn't accidental, it's tactical. Trade in Trump's worldview isn't purely economic, it's a stage for leverage and optics. The EU offered a short-term political windfall that Canada, with its deeply integrated supply chains, simply can't match. Canada already supplies the U.S. with 4 million barrels of oil daily, provides cross-border electricity that powers millions of American homes, and delivers critical materials like lumber and auto parts essential to U.S. manufacturing. These aren't new promises to dangle, they're established realities, making it challenging to repackage them into a new deal that dazzles on paper. Trump craves simplicity. Buy American, pay tariffs, sign here. Canada's complexity, rooted in mutual dependence, becomes a liability in this environment. Prime Minister Carney recognizes this mismatch all too well. In his statements, he stressed that Canada won't chase a template agreement ill-suited to its needs. I don't believe there is going to be a great deal to be had on the table, he said, echoing the challenges partners face under Trump's regime. Unlike the EU, which must import U.S. energy, Canada is the exporter, flipping the dynamic. Copying the EU framework would mean short-term relief at the cost of long-term misalignment. Instead, Carney's team is playing the long game, managing expectations, preparing for potential tariffs, and eyeing the 2026 USMCA review as a window for genuine negotiation. It's a deliberate strategy, one that assures Canadian businesses and citizens alike, we will only sign a deal that's the right deal, that's a good deal for Canada. We're representing Canada. Of course, this patience comes with pain. Sectors like autos, steel, aluminum, and lumber have absorbed hits, with supply chains disrupted and costs rising. Yet, Canada's economy has shown remarkable resilience. According to analyses from outlets like the CBC, GDP dipped by just 0.1% in April 2025, with a similar modest decline projected for May, far milder than initial fears. Businesses preemptively imported goods ahead of deadlines, cushioning the blow, and over 90% of cross-border trade continues under USMCA's protective umbrella, keeping the average effective tariff rate at a manageable 2.3%. Still, fragility looms. If Trump follows through on his threat of a blanket 35% tariff, the true test will arrive. But even in uncertainty, Canada is gaining clarity. This is a structural challenge, met not with panic, but with strategic adaptation. This brings us to a pivotal voice in the conversation. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, whose recent comments have injected a dose of real politic into the discourse. In a press conference amid the heightening tensions, Ford didn't mince words, suggesting that if Trump's tariffs persist, Canada should deepen cooperation with China. You know what Churchill said, "Our enemy of our enemy is our friend." And as long as China plays fair and doesn't undercut our markets, be it the auto sector or any sector, I have no problem dealing with them. This wasn't idle speculation, it was a bold signal from one of Canada's most influential provincial leaders, representing a province that drives much of the nation's economic engine. Ford's remarks came on the heels of a news release from provincial premiers urging a better working relationship on trade with China. A call that seems paradoxical at first glance, given ongoing concerns about Beijing's practices. But in the context of US volatility, it makes strategic sense. Trump has centered tariffs as the linchpin of his agenda, arguing they restore fairness and protect American workers. For Canada, however, they've sown chaos. Repeated hits on steel, aluminum, autos, and lumber, culminating in the looming 35% levy on non-USMCA goods. Businesses on both sides of the border crave stability, but what they've gotten is a moving target, fracturing what was once the globe's most reliable trade duo. Canada's countermeasures have been understated yet effective. Ottawa has mirrored US increases with its own tariffs on American steel and aluminum, but the real shift is in diversification. Provincial leaders are forging new paths, expanding pipelines, developing export routes, and cultivating partnerships beyond Washington. China figures prominently in this pivot. Ontario's two-way trade with Beijing already tops $43 billion annually, skewed toward imports. But Ford's vision extends further. If the US proves unreliable, Canada will engage fair players, including China. The signs of adaptation are everywhere. Canadian brewers, facing inflated prices from US tariffs on aluminum, have turned to Chinese suppliers for cans. RBC reports indicate that by June 2025, nearly 90% of Canadian exports to the US are now fully USMCA compliant, a defensive recalibration of supply chains to sidestep American unpredictability. If this pivot solidifies, the repercussions for the US could be profound. In 2024, Canada imported $349 billion in American goods, surpassing the combined totals from Japan, Germany, and the UK. Redirecting even a fraction to China would sting US manufacturers in autos, machinery, agriculture, and energy, with the pain reverberating in battleground states like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Strategically, the stakes soar higher. China has long aimed to amplify its footprint in the Western Hemisphere, and a warmer trade embrace with Canada would grant Beijing unprecedented leverage in North America, precisely what US policymakers have historically sought to prevent. Trump's tariffs, intended to draw partners closer under American terms, may inadvertently propel them toward rivals. It's a classic case of unintended consequences. Policies meant to bolster domestic workers could fracture alliances, erode influence, and invite competitors into the fold. Trump pledged superior trade deals, but the tariff barrage has yielded hesitation, retaliation, and doubt. Rather than fortifying ties, it's widening rifts. Canada, once America's steadfast economic confidant, is now scouting alternatives out of necessity. In this evolving trade arena, isolation masquerades as strength, but it's a perilous illusion. The query isn't if tariffs will boomerang, it's how long we'll feign ignorance of their fallout. As I reflect on this unfolding drama, drawing from years of observing the ebb and flow of American foreign policy, it's clear that the US-Canada impasse encapsulates broader themes in Trump's second term. His approach harkens back to protectionist instincts that echo the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of the 1930s, which deepened the Great Depression by sparking global retaliation. History teaches us that tariffs, while politically palatable in the short run, often breed resentment and realignment. Canada's stance isn't anti-American, it's pro-Canadian, a rational response to policies that treat allies as adversaries. Consider the human element. The workers in Windsor, Ontario, assembling cars for Detroit dealerships, or the farmers in Alberta exporting grain to U.S. mills. These cross-border lives are intertwined, yet Trump's tactics risk unraveling them. Carney's patience, Ford's pragmatism, and the Northern Corridor's promise all point to a Canada that's evolving, less tethered to U.S. caprice. For American audiences, this should prompt introspection. Are we building bridges or burning them? In pursuing winning deals, are we losing the plot on what true partnership entails? The EU deal, with its tariff concessions and energy buys, might dazzle in the moment, but it pales against the depth of US-Canada integration. Our shared border spans 5,525 miles, the longest undefended in the world, a testament to trust now under siege. As tariffs loom, Canada's resilience shines, GDP dips minimal, businesses adapt, and leaders strategize. This isn't defeatism, it's empowerment. Ford's China overture amplifies the risks. If Canada deepens ties with Beijing, perhaps in tech, resources, or infrastructure, the US could face a multipolar North America, where influence wanes. Trump's team argues tariffs level the field, but evidence suggests otherwise: stockpiling distortions, ally alienation, and rival empowerment. In the end, this trade tale is about choices. Canada chooses deliberation over desperation, strategy over spectacle. For the US, the lesson is timeless. Strength lies in alliances nurtured, not coerced. As August unfolds, the holding pattern persists, but the trajectory is clear, toward a world where America's isolation could be its own undoing. Let's hope wisdom prevails before the costs mount too high.